Hello everybody, I'm Alexey Krabrov, the organizer of SF Scala, and here we are on location at Nitro, and we have an excellent talk today about Play 2.5. So Play is this famous Scala web framework which a lot of people are using to build web apps. And we also have two engineers from Lightbend, formerly TypeSafe. We have Will Sargent and we have Greg Methin. And I'll let you guys tell a little bit more about yourselves.
Okay, sure. So I just started working at Lightbend a couple months ago. Before that, I actually was working on my own startup. I've been using Play for the last couple years at various companies that I worked at. And that's sort of how I got into developing Play. I enjoy it a lot.
Hi, I'm Will Sargent. I got introduced to Play around, the beta, I suppose, around 2.0 when it started actually using Scala as a base, and started writing comments in and adding little fixes here and there until eventually I got hired at TypeSafe, now Lightbend, and now work on the Play team.
Cool. So I noticed the pattern that you both guys were startup founders. You picked Play as the foundation of your company. So what makes Play a good choice for a startup?
I feel like Play, it just works out of the box. It gives you a lot of good features, and it really just sets you up for, you don't have to. I think with Scala, at least in my experience, the Scala ecosystem is a lot of different technologies to choose from, and it's very helpful to just have something that does the right thing from the beginning. And I think a lot of the stuff that we're working on now, we're trying to make it even better for that, like make it sort of show you the right way to do things even more, which that's what I liked about Play, is that I don't have to think about a lot of things, and Play just sort of handles it for me. And I can think about the real complex problems of scaling my infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a similar experience working with Play, is that when you're a startup, there are only so many decisions that you want to make. And even worse than that, the last thing you want to do is unmake a decision when you're working on a startup. You don't want to have to scrap your technology and restart it using something else. And Play has such good fundamentals, such strong infrastructure, especially when it comes to being an asynchronous, non-blocking framework from the very start. Mm-hmm. It makes the most efficient use of your CPU. It makes the most efficient use of your threads. And everything in Play, it accomplishes a very difficult task of being both simple and easy and correct. Mm-hmm. And those are things that are very difficult to balance, and Play does a great job of starting you simple, working under the hood, and letting you swap everything out that you need to.
Mm-hmm. So
without rewriting the entire thing. Let
me follow up with this idiomatic ways to start your apps, right? So there are now established ways for people to write full stack systems where Play is used for the backend and Angular is used for the front end, to give you an example. Mm-hmm. So how do you guys serve this use case, and what do you see people doing in the field? Maybe you can outline some scenarios, right? How different teams use Play.
Yeah. So actually, in my experience, I've worked in a couple of different environments where we have had a separate JavaScript build stack for the front end, mm-hmm. and we're using Play. And there are lots of plugins, SPT plugins that actually allow you to integrate with Gulp, and you can use that. We were actually using Grunt in one of my previous companies. Or you can use SPT Web and just do everything with SPT. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of SPT plugins for TypeScript and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of different options depending on what's best for your team. If you have a lot of JavaScript developers, then you might want to go more with the JavaScript build tools. Whereas if you're more backend or Scala people, then you would stick with SPT and the Scala build tools and stuff mm-hmm. like that.
So you mentioned SBT Web. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit for folks who don't know mm-hmm. what are these tools, like how they make it easy to work with JavaScript from Scala.
Right. So SBT Web is basically just a way of so there are these things called web jars, which are basically packages of various JavaScript libraries. So there's jQuery, there's CoffeeScript, there's all these different. Actually, CoffeeScript is a compiled thing, but there's all these different libraries that people use, and you can and get a web jar of it and access the JavaScript library from your assets in Play, and it's very similar to if you have a dependency in Scala. So you don't really have to use a different tool. You just require the web jar, depend on it, and now it's available to you, and it's part of your build system.
And it's version corresponding to the JavaScript version.
Right. It's versioned. Yeah, it's versioned that way, so that when
So it's much superior version system than what JavaScript has.
I mean, the version system is. I think it uses similar types of versioning, but.
Yes.
It's all in one file.
I mean, we all know like jars just work, right? Like it's good. Like you can just take a jar.
You can't unpublish the npm thing
That's
very
right.
easily, just like what happened yesterday. It's
right.
So that it has that advantage too as well.
I mean, we all know like what to do with jars. So I think if you're a backend developer, and if you can get all your assets coming from jars, like you know what to do with them, you know what to check for them, right? Maven's going to resolve them.
Right.
SBT is going to find them and cache them. It's like you know what to do with them.
Right. So it's a little bit easier process to work with than if you have some other JavaScript dev stack. Yeah.
So Will, I know that you work on the Play website, and so let's say there is a new developer who wants to check out Play. You guys have a lot of resources. Can you talk a little bit about what's available, what's the documentation, like what's a good entry point into Play?
We actually in Play 2.5 we actually took a hard look at the documentation and revamped a lot of the intro pages to give people a smoother experience into Play. Especially, if you don't know Play, if you don't know SBT, if you are looking through everything and saying, how do I download this? Literally, going to Play and going to the download and getting started page actually has pictures and where to push the buttons and how to download this. It will bring you to a UI, which will actually start up TypeSafe Activator, allow you to see all of your compilation messages and give you a button to be able to run and restart your application. And then from there, we have tutorials that are organized by function and by version. So if you are using an older version, you can use Play. You can see how REST APIs are being done in Play 2.3. And then for the newer features, Locke did a great series of blog posts about how to use Akka streams, which are the newest feature in Play 2.5.
Okay.
And how to actually pull Twitter and display them on the web page through that.
This is interesting. So we have our own great Paul Kinski here at Nitro, and he gave Akka Stream talk at Northeast Scala, and so like we're big fans of Akka Stream. So it's great to hear that Play 2.5 supports this. So from what you described, it sounds like Play is an entry point maybe into the whole Scala ecosystem, right? So I remember that Ruby on Rails was the go-to app for web. I didn't do it in years, but kind of Play, we thought about it, we still think about it as kind of Ruby on Rails, Scala on Rails, right? In a way, it's a go-to web framework, and it kind of gives you everything. So in your experience, when newbies come to Scala through Play, right? What are the kind of pain points? What are the things they learn like immediately, and what are the harder things? So if a company is kind of trying to see like if Play is a good web framework for them, but they don't have much Scala expertise, what should they prepare for? What's gonna work? Like there's a lot of advantages, but like what should they expect essentially?
I think especially for people, it depends on what language they're coming from. So if they're coming from Rails, then Rails has a system which includes lambdas, and it includes a system that is very much in the style of Play, in that they both have actions, they both have requests, and they both return results. And they both have the same routing underlying them. So if you look at the routes file, for example, it will look very similar between the two. If you are more Java-based, then Play actually has a Java API, which lets you do everything that you would do in Play with Scala. And all of the documentation is written again using Play 1.8 examples. And this is fully asynchronous and fully non-blocking. It uses Java 1.8 completable stage, so you can pass all of the concurrent utilities that are in Play 2.8, in Play 1.8, in Java 1.8. Thank you, Jesus. Yeah, you don't have to wade into the deep end of the pool. And that's one thing that I tell anybody who's starting with Play, is that if you're comfortable writing Java, then write Java. If you want to learn Scala, but you don't know very much Scala, then it's fine. You can write Java code and you can copy and paste it in IntelliJ, and it will actually turn that into Scala code for you, and then you can use it just as you would normally. And so work on the bits that you're familiar with, and then only start playing with the more complicated or powerful bits of Scala when you're ready to.
Okay.
So yeah, only learn one thing at once. Don't try to learn everything, and become familiar with things as you need to.
Cool. So basically, having both, fully featured Java API and Scala API lets companies kind of,
You can map between the two. You can go to this one. You can try it in Java. You can see how it works in Scala. You can flip between the two. You can include both in the same project. You can literally have a Java file and a Scala file living in the same package next to each other and work perfectly fine.
Interesting. That's pretty exciting. One question I have about the architecture of Play apps, right? So you have this basically single-page apps which basically do a lot of things in the browser, right? So with this kind of movement to do more stuff in the browser, what are the typical patterns? Because when do you need to go to the server essentially, right? So Play basically gives you stuff which exists on the server, right? And it can give you templates, right? So can you talk a little bit about the patterns, right? Like what stuff is mostly done, like what piece of the web app, and maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of what makes it scalable, for because obviously things like Kubernetes don't have this ability to scale. What are the good patterns for Play?
Well, I think now that with the move toward more single-page apps, I think you're seeing more Play is more used as an API layer, and it's really doing a lot of the same stuff that it was doing before. It's just that you're not necessarily rendering templates on the server. You're passing some data down through a JSON or some other type of API, and you're just doing logic on the front end. And then if you have an event on the front end that requires some response to the server, you send it either through a WebSocket or through a REST API of some sort. And then Play is handling the integration with your database. So that might be like a NoSQL data store, or it could be a regular MySQL database, or there's plugins for pretty much anything. And what makes it scalable is that we don't really have state on the server. At least ideally you don't have state on the server in a Play app, and we don't really make it very easy to store things on the server. So you have to have a backend somewhere. You have to have somewhere where you might have a distributed cache, or you might have a database or somewhere, something like that, that you're storing your data in.
Cool. So you mentioned this kind of templates on the server. So I remember, that was like a best practice. Play, had Scala templates.
Right.
And let's look at this is the old-fashioned way to do web apps, which I, did a few years ago. So I'm wondering, right? So let's say I'm a backend developer, right? And I don't know much about JavaScript, and maybe I don't have time to learn right away. So I kind of want to maximize my knowledge of Scala, right? Kind of then, the traditional way is to kind of you have your templates, and then you replace some content. So basically, when the user interacts with the form, it goes, through the server and comes back, and Play has validation and very useful things. So is there a big difference? Let's say I want to heavily rely on these features. I want to do as much in backend as possible, versus writing a whole bunch of JavaScript in Angular. Right, I want to lean on Play. So what is the minimal amount of JavaScript I need to know, right? I can probably do just plain HTML, right, with Play, and not do any JavaScript at all, right?
You can do pre-rendering.
I can do pre-rendering, is it a best practice? Can you give me a realistic scenario? I can have decent looking app which is fast enough, but uses the minimal amount of JavaScript.
I mean, technically, if you want, you can use Scala.js to build a dynamic front end.
Yes.
And you know, it's not the most popular technology these days, but it is a fairly mature technology. So if you want to build everything in Scala, you can. There's a lot of example projects out there that show you, here's how you set up your Scala.js front end, and you can share a lot of the same models from up between the client and server. I do think you still need some knowledge of JavaScript. You need to understand how the DOM works. You need to understand how the fundamentals of JavaScript work to understand something like that.
But the DOM is just like browser technology. Like you need to know how this stuff is rendered.
You need to understand the basics of like what it's actually doing underneath.
Yes.
But you don't necessarily have to know any JavaScript. You do need, if you want to have a dynamic app, you do need to have some amount of stuff that's actually running on the front end.
Yes. What are the typical patterns? Like what works really well so the app is responsive? What stuff people do in the front end, and what is okay to kind of do in play? And play is asynchronous, right? Like what can you kind of let play do in the back end while the stuff is happening in the front end? I mean.
It's really it's not even necessarily something play itself is doing. You're choosing you know, right? You're just choosing what stuff you want to run on the client and on the server, right?
I mean, obviously, like you do all the data processing. Like, I mean, since I'm a Scala guy, like whatever is data, like if stuff is coming out of the database, obviously I'll do all the data processing in the backend, right? Like if I need to do like any kind of filtering, right, and transformation. But like, I mean, is it validation? Like, in obvious like things like your zip code should be 5 digits. Like that's probably we're gonna do it in like a snippet of JavaScript, right?
Yeah, no, a lot of what Play is used for is Play can set up a lot of WebSockets for you beforehand, and it can stream data backwards and forwards between an already established WebSocket and keep a pretty massive amount of open clients at a single time. Even with just one machine, we're talking like lots, like more than I would theoretically think was possible.
What's the order of magnitude?
I think it was like, I think we can get 70,000 with like a fully loaded.
So it's pretty serious bandwidth.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, that it depends on your use case, and it depends on how heavily the CPU is loaded, and also how the kernel is configured at that point, because you have to worry about the backlink.
Right.
But you know, you can do a large amount of data and a large amount of throughput with a Play application, and you don't have to worry about, you know, do I have to send something to keep it open? Do I have to worry about my threading model? Literally, when people have switched over from using other solutions to Play, in some cases they've gotten rid of like, you know, a third or 2/3 of their servers because they're just finding out that Play is so much more efficient, and that Play makes better use of its resources, and Play scales up a lot better. So yeah, Play is very good at handling streaming solutions on the front end, and on the back end, and for handling situations where you have rich interaction between clients. So, you know, cases where you're actually clicking around, where you want low latency, where you want like interactive games, where you want to be able to have chat applications where everything has to happen. Play is very good at all of these kinds of things because you know exactly what you're putting in and what you're getting out.
Cool. So, and probably we'll kind of wrap up with kind of the future directions, right? So obviously Play was one of the mainstays. At some point Play that was the main driver for Scala. Right now I would say Spark is probably, you know, bigger, growing, but Play is like one of the most established technologies. So what do you guys see in that community? How do you see like Play installations in industry? How do you see that community developing, and basically what are the sort of next things after Play 2.5?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're a lot of the growth in terms of like this from the Scala community is starting to slow down, but I still think that Play will be probably the most popular Scala web framework, and I think that it is. I think, as far as I know, and I mean, there really isn't another popular framework. There are libraries. I mean, you can use HTTP and stuff like that. But it's really the only very popular Scala web framework that's out there. And we want to keep being opinionated and keep trying to push people in the right direction in terms of being able to build scalable apps. And And that's kind of what we're working on with Play 2.6 and eventually 3.0, which is probably going to be the next release after 2.6. So we're removing more global states. So we make sure that you have a completely stateless app. You can run multiple apps beside each other in the same JVM. You can run tests in parallel. So we want to make sure that you are set up for writing very, very testable code, very scalable code, very modular code. We're also modularizing more of Play. For example, we're using Juice as the default dependency injection framework now. We want to move that out and make it more so it's easier to plug in different frameworks. We're modularizing a lot of other things as well. And eventually we also want to support HTTP2. That's probably a 3.0 feature. Yeah.
And obviously, you mentioned Scala.js. We're big fans of Scala.js. We did a Scala.js hackathon last year with Howie Lee, who is like one of the kind of, happy faces of Scala.js, really, doing great work, evangelizing it. So, like my dream as a Scala developer, again, like I want my Scala everywhere. Like, how easy is it to integrate Scala.js with Play? And can you guys give me at some point like full stack thing where I'm just using Scala.js and Play together?
There are templates out there.
Yeah, there are templates out there for doing it. I think that one of the focuses maybe for 2.6 and 3.0 is trying to make sure that experience is more streamlined. But there are lots of examples out there. It's not something that's officially supported by Lightbend, Scala.js, but there's a pretty large community around it right now.
Yeah, and that community is great.
Yeah,
it's really supportive and open.
And a lot of the people are using Play as their web framework, and they're just integrating it, and it works very well. I don't think I think that's probably the most popular way of doing Scala.js these days.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we tried last year, and there was a lot of kind of kinks, and kind of we basically had to jump through some hoops. So like it would be super nice to get basically kind of elaborate example which kind of just works out of the box, so we can just do like everything.
Right, and especially when it comes to doing like picking certain frameworks that you're going to use. I think recently there were some very good examples of things that used React. I forget what it was called, but basically they used React on the client side, and they had examples of complete apps that worked in like on mobile and worked on browser. Using React Native as well.
And we're using Play as a backend.
Yeah, and using Play.
Okay, cool.
I think as well.
That's exciting.
Yeah. So.
Will, do you have anything to add to the future directions? Like, what are your plans for Play?
A lot of what we're doing for Play is about making sure that it's open and that it is accessible to absolutely everyone. So part of what we're doing, again, at this talk that we're just going to be giving, is asking for feedback in the documentation, because one of the problems that Greg and I have is we can't see what new people see. So being able to get more feedback on that, being able to smooth out the introduction experience, and make sure that people know where everything is, they know how to get to the templates, and they can start wading in at the shallow end of the pool, and then jump in with the rest of the people when they're ready.
Cool. So for guys who are watching us, go to playframework.com, play with the documentation.
Yep.
If you have some problems.
Big new search banner. Very proud of that.
So yeah, Will told us he just did this today. So test it. Kick the tires, and if something is wrong, submit.
If something is wrong, scroll down to the very end of the page and then click in the documentation, and it will actually take you to the source code for that documentation. You can submit a pull request right there and then. Do it.
Patch is welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.